Hey everybody, it's Alex again for another Futhark Friday. This week we are going back to the second Atir, and the next rune on the list is pronounced Isa, but I've always known it and said it myself as Isa, just because our I in English, especially in American English, is it sounds like an I versus an E or an sound typically. There are exceptions like everything else. And to me personally, Isa sounds closer to the word ice in English. And that's just how I always remembered it because I was like Isa ice, like that makes sense in my head. Um so if y'all feel more comfortable saying it Isa or Isa, I really think at that point it's linguistics and other things involved, and I've never had any issues with how I've said or pronounced my runes. There was no like negative backlash or anything scary, so I wouldn't worry too much about it if it helps you remember it. Now, Isa is one of those. See, I said it again. Isa is one of those runes that looks like our modern alphabet, and it is the letter I in both the runes and in. It looks like the I in the Roman alphabet, so the English, what we use in a lot of countries. I know some other countries don't, but a lot of us do. Um, and Isa, is the rune of ice, and it is also the rune of stillness. Now, we are going to talk about the ice aspect for a good minute, so let's just jump into it. Now, Isa representing ice, we have to think of ice as both something dangerous and something beautiful. This rune is one of the runes that has a duality to it. A lot of the runes do have that duality, like what is it good, like what are the good omens, what are the bad ones, what is this foretelling versus forewarning, etc., etc. But this one even more so because it cannot be read negatively. There is no reversal. It is a simple vertical line up and down both ways. There is nothing to distinguish it from being up to being down, and you don't read it horizontally. Like, that doesn't happen. Um, so you can see its duality easier than just being like, oh, it's good, it's bad. Do I read it upside down? It's just, it always is at the end of the day. Some good examples of, beautiful versus dangerous. Beautiful ice could be something as something as magnificent as a glacier or an iceberg, or just winter wonderland settings. Just it's all icy and white and calm, and there's kind of like a stillness for those of you who haven't had ice in your real life experience, which growing up in California, I definitely didn't have that unless I went to the mountains or until I moved to Texas. So definitely I know there's some people out there, like a lot of people I know have never seen the ocean, so it's just one of those things. If you haven't experienced it for yourself, it's just a little difficult to explain, honestly. But going back to that, you know, beautiful or, dangerous, we talked about hail as a danger in the rune Hagalaz. But yeah, hail, sleet, icy roads, black ice, everything from that to, if you're in the mountains or somewhere with mountains, avalanches are a thing that can be super dangerous and bury towns, buildings, people, that could lead to deaths of all kinds, knocking down trees. It's just a force of nature. Whereas, something simple that many of us use on a day-to-day basis is a freezer. Either because we put ice in our drinks, we enjoy ice cream, or frozen foods, pizzas, what have you. And it's just something that's in most houses these days, small or large, depending. And even something that's simple and daily used to be legitimately a block of ice that people would deliver to your door, and you would just, you couldn't keep a whole drawer full of stuff. It was just those certain foods that you had to keep on ice to keep fresh, and it just evolved from there. Thank goodness. Keeping ice cream more for just a couple days. Um, Issa itself, going back to itself as a rune, does not use a glamour to hide any of its capabilities. So, like I said, it's what you see is what you get. Um, but like an iceberg, this is like one of my favorite examples of what I was reading and what personally comes to mind when I think of ice. Is what you are personally aware of may only be a tiny part, while the rest of it lurks below the surface. Issa, though, is a rune of control, so again, no glamours, and it's kind of in your face, but with the runes and other things, there's a lot under the surface to find later on. Um, and it is a rune of, again, like I said, control, especially of self-control, learning about the stillness of the mind and body through spirituality. So learning control over oneself's mind, body, spirit is a big kind of thing with Issa, and it will quiet emotional distress when it's used correctly. So it's good for people that have anxiety or have so much going on in their life that they just need things to kind of stop for a minute. Now, with a lot of self-reflection, you do have to be careful, though, that it doesn't lead to self-centeredness or give your ego a too large of a boost. So just, you know, two sides of the coin, right? You need to self-love and self-appreciate and know yourself, but you can't do it to the point where it becomes detrimental. Now, Issa also represents water, the element of water itself, because it is ice, it is frozen water. It is the solid, so it is more rigid and less fluid and flexible aspects of water. Like when if you belly flop into water, it hurts. If you fall while you're ice skating, it's solid. If you fall through ice, like that's terrifying. Um, so it represents just something solid and static, something slow to move, slow or resistant to change. Um, and it represents, in that sense, the preserving of things and the actual resistance to change. And all runes coexist together, and I have spoken on certain relationships that certain runes have with others, the ones directly before or after in particular. Issa, in particular, comes after Nauthis, which we talked about last time. And it is a very interesting combination, in my own opinion. It has been previously mentioned by other rune scholars that they are in elemental balance with each other, fire and ice, fire and water, opposites yet needed equals at the same time. But I find it interesting, and because it is super well known, and I've mentioned this in the other previous videos, for the second Etir, that the second Et is a much more aggressive grouping than the first grouping of runes, and I find it kind of interesting that the pairing that's in balance is also a quite literal representation of destruction. Because at the end of the day, fire destroys ice. The sun melts it, direct flame melts it, it ceases to be ice. Um, People will say, well, water is more necessary than ice. Ice was especially more dangerous when we were still in houses that were just fancy huts that didn't have heating, that you were at risk of dying. Any winter was a risk of death and despair. But at the end of the day, again, like I said, fire is destroying or changing the ice. It is no longer ice. It is either steam or water, or if it's hot enough, it just, turns into steam, and then it's gone. It just turns into another element, air, at that point. But we're not getting too far into that because we were just talking about fire and water at this point. But the ice will cease to be itself. So if Issa represents an unwillingness to change, and it's just something static and still, and it needs to quiet, and again, the stillness of self, the flame of Nathis is there to change it, if not at least bend it from its rigidity. Which, at the end of the day, is probably a good lesson here, is that at times it is necessary to stand firm like ice and be unmoving and let nothing and no one change you and what you're trying to accomplish in that moment. But at times you may need the need fire of Nathis so you can relearn to bend again. Again, this is especially good for anxiety and other traumas or life experiences where you might have needed to stand your ground because of whatever life was thrown at you, abuse or traumas, health issues, or what have you. And once you overcame that, it's hard to go back to something simpler. I'm sure I've read a study where once you're used to something negative, it's hard to relearn the positive. And so the pairing of Issa and Nathis as themselves kind of reminds you that though we learn the stillness and we learn to be quiet, we also need to come back sometime. And that is it for this video, y'all. I'm thinking at some point I will make additional information videos for the runes, either as, like I said, pairings or just little tidbits I learn here and there that I can pass on to you. But that's it for this week's Futhark Friday, and join me next time for the next rune, which will be Yera. Thanks, everybody, and have a good one. Bye.